Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our bird identification series. I'm really happy to see a bunch of repeating names. It's very exciting to have so many people coming so many weeks in a row, and welcome to anybody who's new this week. My name is Jenna McDermott, and my coworker is Catherine Dale. She's here as well, and she'll be monitoring the chat as we go through and answering some questions in there probably if they come up. And so we're both here if you need us. We're going to be talking about raptors, kingfishers, and woodpeckers today. And so let's get started. Myself and Catherine, we work for an organization called Birds Canada. And it's a nationwide organization, nonprofit organization, who is the leading science-based bird conservation organization in the country. And our mission is to drive action to increase the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of birds in Canada. And so we do have lots of different programs. And for all of you who've been here for a lot of sessions, you'll hear this over and over again. But we just want to let everyone know who is a newcomer. So most of the programs that we run are citizen science-based, and that means basically that they run off of volunteers who are just regular people who are interested in birds or interested in the program, and they collect data and give it to our organization to put into our long-term data sets, and that can really help us get lots of information that can be useful for conserving birds as the years go on. So right now we have more than 70,000 volunteers nationwide. It's pretty exciting, and we're also excited right now to be doing some programs in Newfoundland. So we are running the Newfoundland Breeding Bird Atlas right now. And to learn more about this atlas, we will be having a webinar on April 4th that's part of this series. So you can sign up for that and you'll learn about how it works, how people can get involved, and where the information goes after the atlas is completed. So a quick rundown of what the atlas is that we are working to map the distribution of each of the species of birds that breed on the island of Newfoundland. So for example, this pine grosbeak that you could see here, so far during the 2 field seasons that we've had, it has been found in each of the squares on the island of Newfoundland that have color in this map that you can see there. So it's a pretty exciting way to see where the birds are on the island, and it's something that anybody can get involved in. As long as you can identify even one species, you can submit data that's really useful for this, this program. Another program that we're running right now is the Atlantic Nocturnal Owl Survey, and that will be starting up at the beginning of April. And Catherine's actually going to be doing a special owl survey presentation. We just set the date for that today. It will be on Thursday, March the 24th at 7:30. And you can watch our social media for that information when we put up the registration links. So Catherine, do you want to just talk a little bit about what people can learn in that presentation?
Sure, yeah. Jenna, I'll just add that we've had somebody say that she can't really hear you this week. So I don't know if you can turn up the volume on your computer or if you can move closer to the computer, but
Shuffling in here.
Yeah, so as Jenna said, we'll be doing a presentation just on owls and on the owl survey on the 24th of March. And in that presentation, Jenna's going to talk a little bit about identifying owl species today, but we're going to go into a little more depth on the owl species that we have here in Newfoundland in that presentation. And then I'm going to talk about the Nocturnal Owl Survey, a little bit about its history, because it's actually a Canada-wide program. It's done in almost every Canadian province. And we'll talk a little bit about why we do it and what we can find out from it. And then the last little bit will be sort of a rundown of how you actually do the owl survey. So if you're just thinking about getting involved this year, you should definitely come out to that presentation to learn a little bit more about how the survey goes and how we record the data and that sort of thing. And if you've just signed up for your first route, please come on out as well. And that will help, I think, get you ready for the season, which starts on the 1st of April and runs to the 15th of May. So yeah, I'm really excited to do that presentation. It's always fun talking about owls, but I'll let Jenna get us off to a little start on the owls today.
All right, thanks, Catherine. And I want to just mention one other program that we that is running nationwide, and it can also be in Newfoundland if you're interested in joining. Another of our colleagues runs this Lewin Survey. And so if you were at the last week's presentation, or maybe 2 weeks ago now, it's hard to keep track. We talked a little bit about the common loon, and probably a lot of you have seen them on ponds or lakes that you visit in the summer at your cabin. So if you're interested in helping track breeding loons, it's pretty low effort. You only have to go to your pond or lake 3 times in a summer and submit the data. And you can check that out at the website that you see on the slide here. Or I could I'll send that email or that information out in the follow-up email again today. And just before we really get started, I would again like to thank all of our partners and funders, because without their help, we wouldn't be able to put on sessions like this. So thanks to all of these people here. So this is a part of what we're going through today. We'll be going through the Newfoundland birds of prey, otherwise known as raptors. And so we could split these up to start off with into diurnal raptors, and diurnal just means active in the daytime. And also the owls. So some of the owls are also active in the daytime, but most are active at night. And we'll talk more about that when we get to the owls, but we're going to start with the diurnal raptors. And as usual, I'm going to be showing adults in breeding plumage that breed on the island of Newfoundland. And we can assume that if the male and the female look different, I will show you what the male and female look like separately. And I'll also quickly mention, this is something that we probably could have put in the first session of beginner birding, but just to mention birding ethics, because if you're getting into birding, maybe you just don't realize some of the things that you should know. So we're just going to say them right now. If you're interested in getting close to birds or looking at birds, you should always give birds more space than you think is necessary. Because just because they are not acting like they are concerned with your presence doesn't mean it's true. You shouldn't use flash photography so that you're not disrupting them if you're taking pictures. If you find a location of a nesting bird, especially raptors like we'll be talking about, and owls today, definitely limit who you're telling that exact location to, just because it is very energetically it takes a lot of energy for the birds to successfully rear their chicks. So if they're always dealing with people coming by and disturbing them, it really can have negative impacts on the success of their nest. So definitely be careful about that. And also limit the use of call playback. So there you can get access to bird songs, but you shouldn't play them in order to attract birds to you. And there is, Birds Canada does have a code of ethics that's on our website, and I'll send it along in a follow-up email as well if you want to read more into that.
Jenna, I'm just going to jump in really quickly because some people may be wondering, given that we said that the Atlas does exactly that, map out birds, some people might be wondering how that goes along with not advertising the exact location of nests. And I will say that what you get out of the Atlas is just the presence or absence of a species in a 10-kilometer by 10-kilometer square. And particularly for sensitive species, we don't advertise those locations. So we are very careful to respect that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your flow, but I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a good note, Catherine, thanks. Okay, we're going to get right into raptors now, finally. So this slide here is a free guide that's produced by the Hawk Migration Association of North America. And I'll send this in the follow-up email as well. It's just a free online PDF. And it's basically showing you birds in flight. And so for raptors, it's really, you can get a lot of identification clues by birds in looking at birds while they're flying. There's a lot of really important plumage information you can get while they're flying versus when they're perched. So this this has a lot of good information in it, and also sort of highlights the importance of knowing the broader shape of a bird as they're flying. So we'll get into that a little bit as well. This is just a good resource, and I will link that as well as we at the end. Okay, on to our first bird. This is an osprey. Probably a lot of you have seen them around before. You'll find them near water bodies, around the bays, lakes, ponds, and even rivers sometimes. And they hunt for fish. So as they fly, you can see them sometimes hovering over the water body, stalled in one location, and they'll dive from there. So that's a really good clue for knowing what this bird is if you're seeing them from a distance. They can go hunting for fish up to 10 to 20 kilometers away from where they build a nest. So if you see one hunting, you're not necessarily seeing where they're breeding, which is pretty cool to know they can go so far away. And you can see a picture of their nest up in the top right there. They make a huge nest out of sticks, and they often construct them on top of hydro towers or poles. And they'll use this nest year after year. They just add sticks to it as they go, and they can get up to like gigantic, huge, gigantic piles, like you can see in that picture. The osprey, as you can see, as it's perched, has a dark brown back and has a white belly. And it also has a bold, dark eye stripe that goes along to the back of the head. They also have a very large, strongly hooked black bill. In flight, as you can see from the flying picture, there's a dark patch at the wrist, just where the wing is bent. And the rest of the belly and underwings are white, and they have a white throat, but the flight feathers are darker colored. And their wings are quite long and thin. So you might mistake them as they're flying a little bit with gulls, but they definitely act differently as they're hunting. Here's another bird that probably is quite familiar to folks here, the bald eagle. You'll find them also near coastlines and water because they're also hunting fish, diving in and hunting fish. And they're also kind of scavengers. So they'll steal prey from other birds like the osprey or gulls, and they'll eat things that they find as well that are already deceased. So that's pretty funny since they look so strong and agile. It's interesting to note that their population actually crashed in the mid-1900s while DDT was being used widely as a pesticide. So once that was banned, their numbers have increased back to levels before DDT use. So they're really a conservation success story, and you can see them all around the island here. Bald eagles also build huge stick nests in trees like the osprey do, and they use these nests year after year. The largest nest that has been found, or I guess recorded maybe, weighed 2 metric tons, which is the equivalent of 8 male polar bears. So they make just gigantic nests and use them year after year. While a bald eagle is flying, they have really heavy, strong wing beats, and they hold their wings straight out from their sides, flat like a washboard. So you can see them soaring or flapping. They just look very strong and sturdy. And their wings are very broad and dark. You can also see from this picture here that they have prominent, I say in quotes, fingers. So the flight feathers at the ends are all separated, and you can see each feather separately. And that's good to note when you see them flying overhead. And they obviously have this prominent white head and white tail. And they are a very imposing looking bird, but we'll just listen to how they sound for a second. And in case you've never heard them before, it's pretty entertaining. So it's not quite the sound that you would expect from such a large, imposing bird. So I'll talk about young bald eagles as well. I'm not going to talk about younger birds for most of the other ones today, but just to note that it takes around 4 or 5 years for a bald eagle to get its adult plumage, to have the white head and white tail. Until then, they are just a speckled sort of amalgamation of dark brown and white feathers. So the two birds that you could see on the left are both younger than 5 years old. And the one on the left would be the youngest. They start out with a black beak, and it gradually changes to the yellow that you see in the adult. And their head also gradually changes from dark into the full white plumage. And the one flying up in the top corner would also be probably around 3 years old, with the amount of white in its wings and tail. So if you see a bird that is speckled brown and white and really the same size as an adult bald eagle, it is just a juvenile. We'll move on now to the Northern Harrier. Northern Harrier males and females look quite different. So I'm starting with the male here, other than the picture of the head in the top right corner, which is a female. This is a medium-sized raptor. And if you look at the picture in the top right of the face, they have this owl-like facial disc, and that's because they hunt mostly by sound. So when you see a harrier flying and hunting, it's going to be sort of cruising low over the ground in open areas, over marshes and bogs. And it has a really buoyant, wavering kind of flight that follows the contours of the land. It's just flying over and listening for small mammals that it can pounce on to eat. While they're flying, they hold their wings up in a slight V, which is called a dihedral wing position. And that's quite diagnostic for them. So this is what I was saying before, that watching hawks in flight is, you can get a lot of clues about what species they are by how they hold their wings and also the way that they fly. So this is the male, and they're sometimes called the gray ghost, as you could see, because they are mostly gray or pale colored. So they do have this gray back. And if you look at them from underneath or even from the top, you can see that the wingtips are dark. And they also have dark edges on their flight feathers near the middle here. They are completely white under the wings, and they have a really long tail. And if you look at one from above, you can see that they have this white patch of feathers at the base of the tail, which is called the white rump. And that's really a good clue if you can pick that out while they're flying as well. This is the female. So as you can see, she's different shades of brown completely over her whole body, other than the white rump as well. So the male and female Northern Harrier both have a white rump, but the female is brown, has a brown body and sort of a buffy brown underneath. And as well, she has barring on her flight feathers, which are these horizontal lines. A female also looks similar to a juvenile looks similar to the female, but it has a bit more of an orange tint on its belly. So we're going to move into a grouping of raptors called the accipiters. And accipiters are the ones that I've circled in red here. They have their body shape is always with these short, wide, rounded wings, and they always have a long tail. They use it as a rudder because when they're hunting, they're chasing usually smaller birds in flight. And so they need to be really maneuverable, and they use their tail as a bit of a rudder for that. When you watch them flying overhead, if they're not hunting, they'll be using a flap, flap, glide flight pattern. Rather than constant flapping or soaring on thermals, they're flap, 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 then glide. And then they repeat that over again. And they are experts at pursuing small birds through trees and shrubs. In Newfoundland, we actually only have 2 accipiters that breed here. And the first one is the northern goshawk. The northern goshawk is quite a large, bulky bird. And they're actually only a couple of inches smaller than an osprey. So they're quite big. As you can see, they are basically all gray, sort of a darker slate gray on the back, wings, and tail. The head is, again, even darker on the cap. And they have a dark line through their eye. On their belly and throat, they're a bit of a paler gray. and on their belly, they have some fine barring, which are these sideways lines. Just like all accipiters, they have a long tail that you can see as they're perched, and you would also notice it when they're flying. And the white eyebrow that you see here is quite an important clue for the northern goshawk. The female and the male look very similar to each other. The female is just a little bit larger and has somewhat coarser barring underneath. And this is the northern goshawk in flight. So you can pick out that white eyebrow even while it's flying. You probably see that even from quite a distance. When they're flying, they look pretty heavy and bulky with a bit of a chunky sort of body. And you can see the fine gray barring underneath on their belly. And they also have white under their tail. They, when they're flying, they have a pretty steady flight with powerful wing beats. So they're not quite doing the flap, flap glide that I mentioned before. They're pretty powerful. And they breed in thick forests here with open areas nearby. So they're mainly hunting grouse, rabbits, and squirrels from on a perch. So they'll sit on the perch, and then once they see something that they want to chase, then they will fly after it from there. The northern goshawk is present here year-round. This is our other accipiter, the sharp-shinned hawk. And this one's very small. It's actually around the same size as a blue jay. So the idea that it's hunting birds is pretty incredible. So it's going for definitely smaller birds. You can probably see it around your feeders if you have feeders out in your backyard. And they will live around human habitation, so you can see them flying around in cities and towns. Females are, again, somewhat larger than the males, but you wouldn't really notice so much out in the wild if you have only one sitting by itself. And they're, again, hunting by pursuing birds on the wing and chasing them until they catch them. This is the adult male and female look quite similar, where they have this slate gray back and wings, as well as the same color on their head that goes all the way down the neck, creating sort of a dark hood. And they have rusty barring, so sideways lines along the belly. When they're flying, they always have their wings pushed forward. So they have this sort of U shape from the head up to the crook in the wing. And they have these broad, rounded wings and a long tail, the typical accipiter shape. And these birds, the sharp-shinned hawks, they really do the flap, flap, flap glide. And the flaps are nearly so quick that you can't even count them, but they're always doing this alternation between flapping and gliding. Alrighty, we're gonna move on to the Budios now. I've circled, or I guess squared them here in this picture. So Budios are another type of raptor. They have broad wings and a short rounded tail. And you'll see birds like this often soaring high in the sky, catching wind thermals, and they are hunting from sitting on a perch or by soaring in the air. And in Newfoundland, we actually only have one Budio. It's called the rough-legged hawk, and it's actually not very often seen, so it's quite exciting if you see one. And this is one of them here. They have a pretty small bill, and that's because Newfoundland is actually the farthest south that they live in their range. They're found throughout the Arctic, and they like open habitat like tundra, marshes, and they nest on the edges of cliffs. So the small bill, their fluffy plumage and their small feet are actually adaptations to their Arctic life. When they're hunting, you'll see them hovering like you would an osprey, only they're hunting over the land, not over water. And they eat small mammals, so they're flying around like a harrier would. They'll hover in one spot and then dive onto a small mammal. They also will hold their wings in a slight V or a dihedral. And I'm just going to zoom in here quickly on their legs, because this gives you the reason for their name, rough-legged hawk. And that's because they actually have feathers all the way down to their feet. So a lot of raptors actually have bare legs that are just sort of bare like a chicken would be, for example, but rough-legged hawks are feathered all the way down to their feet. Rough-legged hawks come in two different color morphs, a light and a dark morph. And morph is maybe not a really good term for it, though it's the commonly used one, because an individual is not changing their coloration throughout their life. This is just two different colorations that different birds can be. And so this light morph is sort of a pale colored bird with brown speckles on it, brown streaks on it. And if we saw it from above, you would see that it has a white rump, like we saw in the northern harrier. And they also have a black wrist patch, as you can see on this picture pointed out, surrounded by white underwings. And then also they have dark tips on their flight feathers at the edges of the feathers. The two pictures of the birds that have the really heavy dark band on the belly are actually juveniles. And so an adult would be more like the bird that is just taking off at the top, where the heavy band on the belly fades into more of a brown and pale speckling instead. And they do have this really small bill that you can see again in all these pictures, and the top of their head is quite pale. This is the dark morph of the rough-legged hawk. And as you can see, it's a very different looking bird in coloration, but you still get the same shape of it with these broad, long wings and a rounded tail, and also quite a small looking bill. And you can see they have an all dark back and rump, so they don't have the white rump spot at the base of the tail. And if you look at them from underneath, the dark wrist patch that we saw in the light morph is still there, but it's just combined with totally dark underwing coloration, other than the flight feathers, which have this pale band and then a dark tip on them. So the dark tip on the feathers of the wing and the tail sort of make a black border around the edge of the bird. We'll move on now to the falcons. So we have a few different falcons here, but all of them are going to have long pointed wings. The pointed wings are a really key feature on falcons. Falcons also have long tails, and they're very quick flyers with strong wing beats. They're also capturing their prey in midair by chasing them down. And sometimes they'll start hunting by sitting on a perch and then diving down onto their prey. And they do have these long pointed wings, really give them maximum maneuverability in the air. We'll start with the American Kestrel, which is really our smallest falcon. And as you can see, the male and female look different from each other. The female's over on the right, she's quite a bit paler. They're both brown on the back and on the top of the head, and a lighter color on the belly. They both have dark bars on the back, though the bars look a little bit different than male and female. And the male has blue-gray wings, whereas the female only has brown wings that are matching the color of the back. Both of these birds, though, do have two black bars on the face that go down from the eye and behind the eye, and those are diagnostic for the American Kestrel here. The American Kestrel nests in cavities, so it'll have a cavity in a tree that's in an open habitat, and when they're sitting perched, you can see them often bobbing their tail. Kestrels are not really common here, but you definitely can find them now and again. These are kestrels in flight. And I just wanted to point this out so you could see their long pointed wings and their long tail. Their wings are really like big triangles rather than rounded like the other birds we've seen so far. it's interesting to watch them while they're hunting or flying because they'll stall in the air and they'll hover, kind of like the osprey again. And they'll also eat while they're flying. American kestrels are so small that they actually eat a lot of dragonflies. So they'll catch dragonflies and eat them on the wing. And you can see the bottom picture that has a bold black bar on the top, on the bottom of the tail. That's the male. It does have this bold black bar on the tail, whereas the female's tail is a little bit plainer. And you can also see if they're a bit backlit, that you'll be able to see on an American kestrel that there's these white windows in the wings, the tips of the feathers, that just appear like little white specks, I guess, at the bottoms of the wings. We'll move on to our next falcon, which is the Merlin. It's a little bit bigger than the American kestrel. And as you can see, it's pretty dark overall. The flight style is quite important in differentiating the kestrel and the Merlin if you don't really have a good look at the coloration. Because while American kestrel is flying, it's sort of fluttering around. You can really tell that it's a small bird, doesn't have quite as much power behind it. So it doesn't have a straightforward flight, whereas a Merlin, it really has powerful wing beats and it's flying in a straight line as if it has an intention of somewhere to go. They're again pursuing prey on the wing, and these are small birds and dragonflies again. And let's talk about what they look like a little bit more. So they are this dark brown on the back and the wings, as well as top of the head, but they have a white throat and their belly is heavily streaked. So the lines are going downward on it. And you can also see in both these pictures that they have a bit of a weak mustache. So there's a line going down as if they have a handlebar mustache, but it's not a big, bold spot of black. It's a little bit faded. And they also have a dark barred tail. The Merlin will live in open treed areas, and they often live in towns. So there's actually often a pair of Merlins that's in Corner Brook, actually. And this is our third falcon, the Peregrine Falcon. It's quite a bit larger than the other two. It's a pretty big bird. And as you can see, it's slate gray on its back and wings. When it's perched, the length of the wings and the length of the tail are approximately the same. They meet each other. And when you look at its head, they have a really bold, dark mustache. So it's not the more faded brown mustache that we saw just on the Merlin. It's a bold, dark black one. It sort of gives them a bit of a hooded appearance when they're flying, kind of makes them look like the pilot of a fighter jet with their helmet on. And it's pretty apropos because they are incredibly fast when they're diving to catch some prey. So they'll be, peregrine falcons will feed on ducks or shorebirds and larger birds like that. And what they'll do is either perch and look around for prey that they'll then dive on, and they can dive with speeds of up to 100 meters per second. And then they'll chase after the bird if they haven't caught it yet. These birds do nest on cliffs. And they also underwent a population decline in the 50s to 70s, just like the bald eagle, because of the use of DDT as a pesticide. But they've also rebounded quite successfully. And now they've reached numbers again like they were pre-DDT. We'll move on now to the owls. So most people recognize an owl by the round facial disc that they have that makes them look like they have this flat face. And they use it like a parabolic dish that focuses down towards their ears. So their ears are actually just slits in their head, like, and they don't actually, like the feathers that are sticking up that are on some owls are not actually ears. The ears are just in the head. And they have special feather structures on their wings that allow them to fly silently. Females are typically larger than males in these birds. We'll begin with the short-eared owl. This is a medium-sized owl. It's actually a diurnal owl, which means that it flies during the day or hunts during the day. And it's found in open habitat, so tundra or bogs, open areas like that. And you'll see it sort of flying low over the ground as well, like we were talking about with the northern harrier. You can see on the picture where it's perched that has some short ear tufts. These are often not visible because they're so small. And again, they're not actually the ears, they're just ear or feathers that we call ears. They're overall brown on the top with dark streaking on them. And underneath they're a bit paler with streaking on the chest. And they have really long, thin wings. Also, if you look at the picture of the short-eared owl in flight here, you'll see that it has two dark bars on the tips of the wing. You'll also see, if you look at their face, that they have this dark area around the eye. You can imagine it's sort of like 90s grunge eye makeup. And so they do look out for this sort of dark area there. These birds nest on the ground and they actually migrate during the winter to go south. I'm just going to compare here the short-eared owl and the northern harrier together, because although one is an owl and one is not, they actually can look quite similar. If you see one of these flying around and hunting, just because of the way that they do fly is quite similar, and the areas that you'll find them in are often the same. So on a short-eared owl, if you look at them from underneath, you'll see these two dark bars on the underneath of the wing that I mentioned earlier. And if you look at the northern harrier in comparison, on the male, which is the gray one, they have black tips on their wings, but they don't have a second bar, and the female is just brown, so it looks different in that way. And if you look at them from above, you'll notice that the short-eared owl doesn't have that white rump, whereas the northern harrier male and female have the white rump there. And they also have quite a bit of a longer tail than the short-eared owl. So those are a few things to look at if you see a bird like this. We'll move on to the great horned owl. This one is probably well known from pictures or seeing them around parks or in your area if you have some wooded areas near your house. And they're pretty unmistakable with their really large ear tufts that stick up above their head. It make them look almost like they have a sort of cat-like face. They have a really bulky body, and they're sort of brown or gray color with mottling on it on their back and their belly as well. They do roost in trees and they hunt on forest edges, and they are nocturnal. So we often hear them more than we see them, and you might recognize this noise. I'll play their call right now. So if you hear that around your house, you'll know you have a great horned owl in residence. We also have here the northern hawk owl. This is another owl that is actually active during the day, so it's a diurnal owl. And these ones aren't going to be found near towns or human habitation. They're found in really boreal forest, in openings like bogs, burns, or cut blocks. And they'll perch at the top of the tallest tree and call from there and hunt from there as well. So they are a bit smaller. They're a medium to small owl. They have a long pointed tail, and their entire underparts are barred with these sideways lines all the way down to the tail. If you look at their head, you'll see that they have a black frame that goes around from the eye and down the sides of the cheeks, and they have yellow eyes and bill. And on their forehead, they have spots that go all the way up the forehead, up onto the top of the head. These white spots. And their back is brown with white spots on it as well. So they don't really sound like your typical owl that you imagine, but we are learning today that owls sound quite different from each other. We also have here the northern Sawet Owl. If you have a field guide, it might not actually include the northern Sawet Owl in the range map in Newfoundland, because in the past they haven't actually been found here. They've moved in. more recently, but they are actually quite common now in Newfoundland. So this is a pretty small owl. It's just around like this big, if you could see my video. It's just a little guy, and it's got quite a compact body with a large head. It has yellow eyes, and it's mostly brown all over. So a darker brown on the back with a few white spots. And its belly is this paler color with broad brown streaks that go down it. On its face, if you look at the edges of the face, there's no black border. So the cheek coloration sort of melds into the coloration of the back of the head. And you'll see that they have a white V on their face that goes from the top of the bill over their eyebrows. And on their forehead, they have some fine striping, some fine white striping. These birds are also nocturnal, and so they're roosting during the day, and they like treed areas for hunting and roosting. And this is what they sound like. This is the Boreal Owl. This is another small owl. It's around the same size as the Sawet Owl. And it's also got a pretty compact body with a large head. And it's also mostly brown everywhere, but it has white spots all over its back instead of only a few on the sides. And if you look at the spotting on the forehead, it has spots just along, or finer spots along the forehead that go into larger spots on the top. On the belly, they have brown and white spots and streaks instead of just streaks. And if you look at their face again, you'll see that around the edge of the face, they have a black frame, but it's broken up with white spots, so it's not a complete frame. The Boreal Owl is also nocturnal, so it will be roosting during the day, so you're more likely to hear it than see it in the night. This is what it sounds like. So if anybody was at last week's presentation and you have a really good memory, you might remember that actually the snipe, the Wilson snipe, sounds quite similar to the Boreal Owl. And that's something that Catherine will tell you about more if you go to the Nocturnal Owl Survey presentation. I'll just do a quick comparison of the Northern Sawet Owl, the Boreal Owl, and the Northern Hawk Owl because they can look a little bit similar. So first we'll look at the frame around the face. On the Sawet Owl, there is not really a frame at all. The color blends from the face to the back of the head. Whereas the Boreal Owl, the frame is there, but it's sort of broken up by these white spots. And on the Northern Hawk Owl, it has a really bold black pattern that goes all the way around the cheeks without being interrupted. We can also look at the differences in their forehead. So the Sawet Owl has fine stripes on the forehead, whereas the Boreal Owl has spots on only the forehead. And the Hawk Owl, the Northern Hawk Owl has those fine spots that go on the forehead all the way to the top of the head. And there's also differences in the coloration on their belly, which is the Sawet has vertical stripes, like broad vertical stripes. The Boreal Owl has vertical stripes and spots. And the Northern Hawk Owl has horizontal bars and also a long pointed tail compared to the short tail of the others. You can also look at their behavior to tell these apart because the Northern Hawk Owl is active during the day, whereas the other two are active during the night. Okay, we've obviously moved out of owls here, and we're on to our one and only kingfisher that we have in Newfoundland, which is the belted kingfisher. The belted kingfisher, as you can see, has this long, strong, pointed bill. So it's using it to catch fish. It will fly over water and plunge, dive in, catch fish with its beak. They have a really large crest, as you can see in the female, which is the picture on the right. But they also can smooth that crest down sometimes if they're relaxed, and it'll look like what the male has his head looking like on the left. So don't be confused if you find one that has a smooth looking head instead of having a large crest on it. You'll see that both the male and female have this dark blue-gray above on their head and their back and wings. And they also have a white throat and a white belly. The male has only one dark blue band across the chest, whereas the female has an extra band. She has the dark blue band, but she also has a brown band that goes across the belly. So they look the same except for that extra band on the female. Sometimes you'll hear a kingfisher before you'll see it, and it sounds like this. And they also have, if you see them in flight from below, you'll see that they have a paler section of feathers that looks like a white wing patch in flight. So they have this rattling call. And now we'll move on to our woodpeckers. So we have a few different ones here that we're going to go through. And a lot of people recognize woodpeckers for the shape of their bill. They're this chisel-like bill. They also have stiff tail feathers, and they use their tails to prop themselves up against tree trunks that they're moving up and down to collect insects and feed along the trees. So males usually have an additional color patch compared to females, but otherwise the males and females are similar to each other. And all of the woodpeckers excavate cavities where they nest and they roost. I'll start with the yellow-bellied sapsucker, and it's really uncommon in Newfoundland, but it's seen yearly around the island. So keep it in your mind in case you see one. And they breed in mixed woodlands, and they also migrate away from the island in the winter. So this is a medium-sized woodpecker. It's a pretty snappy-looking bird with this red cap that both the male and females have. They have a pale sort of yellow tint on their belly, and both the males and females also have a black bib. The wings are black with this prominent white bar on them, and that's really a diagnostic clue. It's the only woodpecker here that has this really broad white bar on their wing. And on their back, they also have some messy white bars. The males and females look the same, except for that the male has also a red throat, whereas the female's throat is white. The sapsucker is quite interesting because it actually will drill holes in this sort of configuration on trees, and it's doing that in order to collect sap into them. So it's making these little wells, the sap will flow in, and then they'll go back to this tree and actually drink the sap out of them, like their name, sapsucker. So they're drinking sap and also eating the insects that go there. This is the Downy Woodpecker. It's the smallest woodpecker that we have here in Newfoundland. And it's pretty much a black and white bird. It has a short, stubby bill and a white belly and throat. And it also has a white patch on its back. Its wings are black, but it has large white spots on them. And the difference between the males and the females is that the males, who are on the left here, have a little red spot on the back of the head, whereas the females don't have that red spot. They only have the same big white broad eyebrow. These birds are actually small enough that they can forage on small branches and weed stalks without them falling over. And they're common in treed areas and can be found within towns and parks as well. So these are ones that you can probably see around your towns. We'll move on here to the hairy woodpecker, which you might think looks nearly exactly the same. And they are very similar looking species. The hairy woodpecker is significantly larger than the downy when they're side by side, but it's pretty hard to tell the difference when only one is there by itself. And I'll talk about telling them apart on the next slide. But again, these are a black and white woodpecker. They have a white belly with black wings that have white spots on them. They have a long bill instead of the short bill of the downy woodpecker. And the males, again, have a red spot on the back of the head, whereas the females have only the white. So here we have a bit of a comparison between the two of them. So we have the Downy Woodpecker on the top and the Hairy Woodpecker on the bottom. The Downy Woodpecker has a short bill. And what we mean by that is, if you look at the very bottom right, if you turn the bill back onto its own head, it is less than a half of the length of the head. So it only go to about where the back of the eye is. Whereas if you turn the bill of the Hairy Woodpecker back onto its own head, it's more than half the length of the head. So it goes way past the back of the eye, near to the back of the head. So long and short in this case is very useful to compare to its own body. And that's the best way to tell a Downy versus Hairy Woodpecker apart in Newfoundland. We also have American three-toed woodpeckers here. These are really interesting because they have a yellow crown on their head for the male, whereas the female has a totally black head. They're found in old growth boreal forest, especially in burned areas. And the way that they feed is actually by flaking bark off of the trees to find the beetles underneath. So you can see in the pictures a little bit, the areas that these birds have just flaked off the outer bark. They're again, mostly black and white. They have a white belly, and they have this black and white sort of laddering on the back, which is an important clue for them. And they also have black barring on their sides. We have also the black-backed woodpecker here, which looks quite similar to the American three-toed woodpecker that we just saw. And, but for the black-backed woodpecker, they don't have that black and white laddering on the back. They have a completely glossy black back and head. So it's really, you don't find any white on the back at all. It's completely black. The male, again, has a yellow spot on the crown, whereas the female doesn't have that yellow, it's only black. And they have a white belly again and black barring on their sides. These birds are also found in old growth conifer forests, and they also flake bark off of the conifers. They also like disturbed areas like burns and areas where there's a lot of dead trees where they can find food. Now we'll move on now to a completely different looking woodpecker and our final bird for the evening. This is the northern flicker. It's a quite large woodpecker. It likes open habitat near trees and also nests in cavities. And the northern flicker also migrates. Most of the other woodpeckers stay in Newfoundland for the winter. This is a completely different looking woodpecker. It's mostly brown colored with this sort of rich brown on the head. Males and females both have a red stripe on the back of the head, but the male is the only one that has the black stripe that goes from the bill down the neck. So the female you can see on the bottom right there, she doesn't have any black stripe going from the bill down at all. If you look at the perched bird here, you'll see that they have this really bold black band that goes along the chest, and also these perfect black spots on the belly. Like someone just painted them on there with a paintbrush. If they're flying, you'll see that they also have a white rump, like some of the other birds we've talked about tonight. That's on both the male and the female. And if you look under the wing, you'll see it's bright yellow under the wing and also under the tail. These woodpeckers act a little bit differently than the other ones. So they're not spending as much time on the tree trunks. They're actually more often found on the ground. They really like to eat ants. So you could often see them foraging around on the ground, collecting ants. Okay, so that's all of the birds we're going through tonight. And back by popular demand, we're going to be doing some quizzing. This is obviously an unmarked quiz. It will be anonymous, just to see how much you've learned this evening. And we'll go through some notes of what to look for in the birds we go through. So here's our first bird. And I'll launch this poll. If it is showing up in front of the bird, you should be able to, on your own screen, click on the top of the poll box and drag it to wherever you want it to go. All right, we're getting some answers coming in here. Rapidly coming in. Looks like maybe this is a tricky one. We didn't get a view like this while we were going through the birds, so we'll go through it at the end. I'll just give it a few more seconds here. All right, I'm going to end the poll now and share our results. So we've got a bit of a mixed bag here. A lot of people thought it was a rough-legged hawk. This is actually a Merlin. And I could see maybe why we thought it was a rough-legged hawk because of that dark sort of barring on the chest here. But the important thing to look on this bird to know that it's a Merlin is to look at the head. So we see that it has this sort of paler mustache coming down from the side of the bill, which is diagnostic for the Merlin. So the Merlin is the totally sort of dark brown bird with this dark barring on the belly and this sort of pale mustache coming down from the bill. All right. We will go along to our second one. Oh. Here's our next bird. What do you think this one is? This is also a tricky bird, I have to say. It's interesting seeing all the answers coming in here. Looks like maybe we've got a tricky one here. Just leave it a few more seconds. Okie dokie, I'm gonna close the poll and share our results here. We got a bit of a mixed bag again, but most people thought this was a young bald eagle, which I put as a possible answer because it is not correct, unfortunately. A young bald eagle would always have a little bit of white in it. So it would have some white along the chest or the belly, or some white in the wings as well. Whereas this bird is completely dark. And it has this small bill, even though it's hooked. So we know it's a raptor, but it's quite small. And so we talked about that for the rough-legged hawk. And this is actually the dark morph rough-legged hawk. So if we think back to the beginning, that bird was entirely dark on the back and belly and head. And from underneath, it had that sort of dark under the wing, and sort of a dark border as well. So that was a really tricky one. A sharp-shinned hawk would be sort of a slate gray on the back and brown on the belly. Okay, these are tricky, everybody. Keep on, keep on going. We'll make it through. Okay, here's our third bird. And here are your options. What do you think this one is? Oh, we've got quick answers coming in now. Okay. We have 80% of people have answered. So I'll leave it for a second. Okie dokie, let's close this one, see how everyone did. Popular vote here was a hairy woodpecker, and those who said hairy woodpecker are correct. Well done. To talk about the other ones, the downy woodpecker, we're looking at the size of the bill for hairy versus downy woodpecker. And on this bird, you can see the bill is quite large. So if you turn the bill back on the head, it's probably around the length of the whole head. And so that would be a hairy woodpecker. They have a larger bill. The northern flicker is more of a brown color instead of black and white. And the American three-toed woodpecker is black and white, but doesn't have red on it anywhere. It has yellow on the head instead. And it has sort of less white on the back as well, and no white spots on the wing. Good job, everybody. On to our next one. Here's your next bird. And here are your options. People are maybe not quite so sure about this one. Raptors are very difficult. It takes a lot of practice to get used to them. All right, we're getting up there. 75% of people. Whoop, jumped to 80 just now. Okay, I'm going to end it in a couple of seconds here. Okay, here's what everybody thought here. 62% of people said Northern Harrier, and that is correct. This is a female Northern Harrier. The male Northern Harrier, if we can think back, is mostly gray or pale colored. But the important clue here, one of them is this white rump that you might be able to just make out on the top of the bird. A northern goshawk, we looked only at adults here today, and they are a pale gray color with a white, strong white eyebrow. So they look a little different for that. And a short-eared owl. So we had a little bit of confusion with that. The short-eared owl wouldn't have that white rump on it. And they also would have paler under their wings instead of this brown under the wings. And the rough-legged hawk would be, if it was a light one, then the under wings would be white with only a wrist patch, a dark wrist patch. And if it was a dark one, then they would be sort of black and gray looking from underneath. All right, everybody. We'll move along to our next bird. And here it is. Okay, I'll close it in just a couple of seconds. Okay. Here is the results. Everyone is very sure of this one, that it's an osprey, 94% of people, and that is correct. This is an osprey. You could tell because of the sort of white and black dichotomy of the bird here. It's very large, sort of soaring in the air. A rough-legged hawk wouldn't have that really dark black patch on the head going down to the neck. A northern harrier would have a bit of a longer tail, and the short-eared owl would have two 2 white bands on the wrist instead of that dark patch there. Very well done, everybody. Maybe a lot of people have ospreys near their houses, cabins. All right, so we'll move on to our next bird here. Second to or third to last one. And here are your options. I'm not sure if you can see its head, but you should be able to move your pole window to the side if the bird is cut off. This is a bit of a tricky one, definitely.
Excuse me.
Yes. Hi.
I've got I might have a feather from a give me a second. I forgot what it was.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to end this poll. And let's see what we've got here. So we have a bit of an even split between American three-toed woodpecker and a black-backed woodpecker. And that is fair because those are quite tricky. But the main thing to look at between the two of those is that the American three-toed woodpecker has this sort of white and black barring on the back, which we see in the picture. So this is an American three-toed woodpecker. A black-backed woodpecker would have no white on the black at all. It would be completely black from the top of the head down to the tail. Good job, everybody. That was a tricky one. And let's go to our next bird here. Probably a crowd favorite. Here are your options. Okay, just give it a few more seconds here. Oh, got lots of people weighing in on this one, 84% of people. Okay, I'll stop it now. And here we have, as many of you suspected, a northern Sawet Owl. So a Boreal Owl and a northern hawk owl would both have a black border of some sort around their face, whether it was bold or having spots in it. And a short-eared owl has a pretty different body shape, and they're also found in open habitat instead of in the woods. They're quite a bit thinner and with a longer tail and smaller head. Good job, everybody. And we'll just move on. I think this is our final one. I think we might get a really good success rate here. Everyone's very sure about this one. So I'm gonna leave it open only a couple more seconds. And we'll close it. 100% success. Everybody knew this was a bald eagle. Well done, everybody. And that was our final one. So thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I will be sending out a follow-up email as usual with some resources that I mentioned and a few other things in it. As always, feel free to get in touch with us. by email. You can also feel free to follow us if you're on social media. We have a Facebook account and an Instagram account that you can see at the bottom of the page here. And we're always happy to hear from you if you want to get involved with any of our projects. If anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute or type them in the chat. I see there's a lot of chat messages here. I don't know what they are.
Excuse me.
Hi, yes.
So yeah, I have a feather. We think we have a feather from a northern flicker.
Wow, that's very cool. Does it have a, is the hard section that all of the feather pieces are attached to, is it yellow?
Yes.
Yes, it sounds exactly like a northern flicker. That's very exciting.
And even the hard pieces, bit yellow.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We've really enjoyed this.
Thanks for coming. It's great to have everybody here.
Jenna, just a couple of questions coming through in the chat, mostly people saying thank you, but we do have a question about golden eagles and whether we get golden eagles in Newfoundland.
Golden eagles definitely don't breed here. I haven't heard of many cases of them being seen randomly here. I'm sure they've probably popped up in the past, but I don't think that they come by often, if they do at all.
I think you're right. I think we'd have some excited birders if golden eagle popped up here.
But golden eagles, they do migrate, and so other places that are more southern than here would see golden eagles, but I think that they probably pass by the province a little bit to the west.
Okay, well,
snowy owls.
We've got lots of questions coming in here. So Vicky says she may have seen a golden eagle in Bonavista, which would be very cool. Yeah, Teresa has asked how common are snowy owls, and I think I didn't see who just spoke up, but I think that was a question about snowy owls as well.
Yeah, snowy owls also just sometimes pop up in the winter here. They're not super common. They're definitely more common in the winter on the mainland. And I think most of the ones that pop up in the winter here are actually from Greenland, and they're sort of passing on through into the Maritimes, as far as I understand.
And we have similar questions about gyrfalcons and Steller's sea eagles and whether they've ever been to Newfoundland.
The Stellar sea eagle, there's been one Stellar sea eagle that has been traveling around North America for the last year, I think, and popping up kind of everywhere, but I don't think it has been in Newfoundland. Gyrfalcons are rare in Newfoundland. They usually pop up in the winter, and they'll be in areas where there's a lot of ducks and things like that. So sometimes a gyrfalcon will pop up at Kitty Vitty Lake, for example, in St. John's, but they're definitely just passing through, catching a meal as they're on their way other places.
Okay, and one more question about, you mentioned several times the effect of DDT on bird populations, which I believe was largely thinning of eggshells in raptor eggs. Yeah. Linda wants to know if neonicotinoids are having similar effects.
It's always hard to tell in shorter term what the full effects are. So I haven't heard of any effects on eggshell thinning, which is what DDT did for raptors, but neonicotinoids are thought to have decreased the populations of a lot of aerial insectivores, which are, for example, your swallows and swifts. They're catching insects on the wing over a lot of farm fields and things like that. And so it's probably a different grouping of birds that pesticide is affecting more. So maybe not quite the raptors quite as much, but who knows what will come of it in the future.
Yes, and Vicky said that Cape Race seems to have snowy owls, and I think that's true. I think that is one of the places they tend to pop up in the winter.
Very cool.
Okay, it seems like the questions have slowed down here. I have a question for you though, Jenna. Can I ask you a question?
Yes, do tell.
As you know, raptors are not my area of expertise. And I noticed on the pictures you had of the short-eared owl, there seemed to be a lot of variation in the plumage. Like you had some pictures that were very light and others that were very dark. Can you speak at all to the variation in the plumage?
Yes, and I should have actually mentioned that on the slide while I was there, and I guess I forgot, but a lot of that
was a lot of information.
It was. A lot of that has to do with the sex of the birds. So females will actually be darker. Males are somewhat lighter and females are darker. But generally for raptors, there's a lot of variation in plumage coloration. So for example, red-tailed hawks, which we don't really have here, but sometimes appear, they have such a variation in their plumage that you can get like a nearly completely brown one versus one that looks almost completely white. So there is really a lot of variation in plumage for raptors. But for the short-eared owl, a lot of it's male versus female.
All right, thank you. Yeah, we're seeing people talking about their owl sightings, which is, yeah, anytime you see an owl, that's pretty special.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but we don't seem to have any more questions unless anybody had anything they wanted to add. Okay, well, when Jenna sends out this week's follow-up, we'll make sure to include a registration link for the OWL webinar in March. And that will also be on our website and will be on our Facebook and Instagram as well.
Yeah, for sure.
And otherwise, I hope we see many of you next week for warblers, which I'm really excited about because I love warblers.
Exciting. All right, thanks everybody for coming. We'll see you next week.
Bye, everyone.